Time to pack my bag. This video is not gonna be about Sweden. I'm actually traveling to Poland. Wargaming, the company behind the online multiplayer game World of Warships, have invited me to their 10-year anniversary in Gdynia. I'm gonna visit museums, explore the history of Gdynia, and meet a lot of World of Warship fans. And I have a feeling that there's gonna be a couple of beers involved as well. Come on, let's take a trip to Gdynia, the city of sea and dreams. For many Swedes, Gdynia in Poland is mostly known as a place to buy cheap booze. There are ferries from the south of Sweden, and many people come here to stock up on vodka and beer. But some also come here to visit the nearby spa town of Sopot, or to explore Gdansk, also known as Danzig. But they're missing out on something in that case. Gdynia is a lovely city all by itself. It's not a big place, and you might encounter some drunken Swedes, but it's also a place full of charm. Today, you and me are gonna find out what there is to do in Gdynia. There are many ways to get to Gdynia. Or, well, that's actually not true. You can come here by ferry or by plane, and that's about it. The airport lies in Gdansk, and it's just 30 minutes away from Gdynia by direct train. The ferries from Sweden depart from the town of Karlskrona in the south, a famous naval base and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. If you have a couple of days to spare, I would recommend a visit to Karlskrona, and you can combine it with a trip to Gdynia. Full disclosure, I haven't taken that ferry for a long time, so I actually don't know what it's like right now. But I guess that it should be pleasant enough. There's a few departures per day, in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening. I would recommend that you take the evening boat and you spend the night on board, then you can explore Karlskrona during the day before. The ferry company is called Stena Line, and you have some drink and food options on board, but it's not exactly a pleasure cruise. It's not comparable to the ferries between Stockholm and Helsinki, or Stockholm and the Åland Islands. Those are proper white trash cruises of the Baltic Sea, but Stena Line, that's mostly just transportation. Even though I'm sure that there's a fair bit of white trash traveling here too. No offense, I love cruises like that, and I happily admit that I'm part of the white trash crowd. Either way you do it, eventually you'll reach Gdynia. So let's talk a bit more about what you can expect from this lovely little seaside city. When looking up information for this video, I learned a new word, conurbation. It's apparently a term to describe an extended urban area where cities grow together. I thought that was urban sprawl, but as we say in Sweden, a beloved child has many names. Either way, Gdynia is in a conurbation with its big brother Gdansk and the spa town of Sopot. But when it comes to Gdynia in particular, the center of the city has been praised for its modernist architecture. In fact, the Gdynia city center is part of the tentative UNESCO World Heritage Site list. It's a unique urban complex with well-preserved architecture from the 1920s and 30s. The city has maintained a lot of the original street names and building layouts, and all new buildings must fit in with the modernist architecture. It was added to the UNESCO tentative list in 2019, but it's a long process to be accepted. Poland currently has 6 entries in the tentative list, and the Gdynia city center is one of them. Unfortunately, I don't know much about architecture. I can't even tell the difference between Bauhaus and brutalism. But I think that most people are like me. I can still appreciate the beauty of this city center, even if I don't know all the details. Aside from looking at architecture, there's also a lot of museums in Gdynia. There's the Emigration Museum, for example. Poland has had thousands and millions of people emigrating for various reasons. Primarily economic and political reasons, and the Emigration Museum tells these people's stories and tries to show their hopes and dreams. The concept is pretty similar to the emigration museums in Sweden that talk about all the Swedes that left for America. But Poland has had several waves of emigrations, so there's a lot more to cover here. If you want to know more about Gdynia, there's also the Gdynia City Museum. But the museum that I'm most interested in is the Naval Museum. There's something special about old and new ships and trying to imagine what life was like on board. And the Gdynia Naval Museum also has a lot of things that small boys and supposedly grown-up boys like me find fascinating. Weaponry, submarines, and a lot of information about the Polish Navy. A couple of exhibits at the museum that deserve an extra mention is the submarine ORP Sopot from 1967 that actually started out in the Norwegian Navy. She was later transferred to Poland, where she served up until 2018. Speaking of submarines, I know the stupidest joke ever. What's long and hard and full of seamen? A submarine, you pervert! And there's also the destroyer ORP Błyskawica, which was actually the most powerful destroyer in Europe during World War II. The destroyer is located on the South Pier, and you can visit it most days, but not always. That's because she's actually still in service in the Polish naval fleet, even though she's mostly used for meetings and celebrations these days. Either way, she definitely makes for a striking sight from the harbor. And so does the sailing ship Pomorza, another museum ship in the harbor. And she's not just a museum ship, she also used to be a training ship. Pomorza is a three-master that was built in 1909, and she served as a training ship between the 1930s and the 1980s. So quite a few people have stood there and swabbed those decks and hoisted anchors and whatever you do on sailing ships. She's considered one of the most important treasures of the Polish maritime heritage. And it's easy to see why when you look up at the magnificent silhouette that she makes. When I'm in the harbor, I think that I need to talk a bit more about the port of Gdynia. The ships that I mentioned, and a lot more, can be found on the southern pier, and it's one of the most visited parts of the city. Kosciuszko Square is a seaside square that merges with the pier, and it has some really nice fountains and exhibitions and sculptures. But the port and the square is surprisingly young. Gdynia used to be a small fishing village, but in 1922 the Polish parliament decided that a port should be built here. The port was built in the coming years, and the city grew alongside it. Gdynia was transformed from a sleepy little village into a proper city in just a few years. In 1920, Gdynia had a population of around 1,000, but by 1939 the population had grown to 125,000 people. It's an example of modern and efficient city planning, and the port of Gdynia was at the heart of that transformation. But then some things happened in 1939, and by some things I mean the Germans. The Germans seized Gdynia and made this port into the base for the German Navy. A lot of buildings and structures were destroyed during that time, and the port didn't reach the same peaks as in pre-war times until 1965. But speaking of wars, let's have a look at something pretty special that's happening in Gdynia right now. One of the reasons that I'm visiting Gdynia is that Wargaming, the company behind the game World of Warships, kindly invited me over. Yep, this is a sponsored video in other words, but I think that you're gonna like this sponsored segment. I'm visiting Wargaming when they have a very special event at the Naval Museum. Wargaming is celebrating their 10-year anniversary, and they've invited a lot of people to the event. And there's also a grand opening of their new gaming room. Quite a few people interested in the gaming room. Yeah, looks awesome. I wish I had this at home. I wonder what the specs are on those computers. I think it's not cheap, at least. The gaming room is now part of the Naval Museum, so you can come check it out anytime you want. If you don't know what World of Warships is, well, what stone have you been living under? Either way, it's an online multiplayer game where you command, well, warships, as the name would suggest. You unlock new ships by collecting experience points, and these ships include everything from destroyers and battleships to submarines and aircraft carriers. It's a game full of history and massive explosions, basically everything that appeals to overgrown kids like me. If you sign up right now with the code XVOYAGE, you get 20 days premium access, a 6 skill point commander, and the Japanese cruiser Tenryu for free. Use the link in the description. It's the perfect time to start playing World of Warships. This isn't the first time that Wargaming have put together an event like this. Or, well, it's the first time that they're opening a gaming room at the Naval Museum, and it's the first time that they turned 10 years old. But they've hosted other fan gatherings before in other cities like Krakow. And it's always an event that fans really appreciate. There's excellent food and entertainment, and I got to visit both the Naval Museum and Błyskawica for free. And they also gave me a goodie bag with awesome freebies as well. World of Warships is completely free to play, and it's a game that's perfect for people like me. The combination of strategic gameplay and a focus on historical warfare makes it a unique experience. And on top of that, Wargaming invited me to this amazing event, so I really have to thank them for giving me the opportunity to explore Gdynia. And speaking of exploring Gdynia, let's talk a bit more about the city. Gdynia has been called the City of Sea and Dreams, where you can hear the seagulls sing. That's intended to be poetic, but I think that the bit about the seagulls spoils it a bit. Quite a bit, actually. There's been people living here since prehistoric times, and it shares a lot of history with eastern Pomerania. In the late 900s AD, Gdynia was included in the emerging state of Poland, but Gdynia seceded from Poland in the late 1000s. And then they got back with Poland again in the 1100s. I guess it was a bit of will they, won't they for a while. But then Pomerania separated from Poland in the 1200s, and Gdynia went along with Pomerania. And that's actually when the first use of the name Gdynia was recorded, in 1253, as a small Pomeranian fishing village. Then things continued to be messy for a while. The Teutonic Order invaded Gdynia in the 1300s, for example. And the village was passed on to a Cistercian abbey in 1382. And that's how things remained until 1454, when Gdynia became part of Poland again. And that was followed by even more fighting and even more occupations. By Prussia in 1772, for example, and by the German Empire in 1871. Oh, and Sweden invaded Poland a couple of times in the 1600s as well. Sorry about that. But Gdynia wasn't exactly a big place in those times. In 1789, there were 21 houses in the village. However, that changed after World War I. Between 1920 and 1939, Gdynia grew from 1,000 people to 125,000. But the city didn't grow quickly at the start. The port was built first, and it wasn't until 1925 that the actual city construction started. A special city building committee, that's a fun word to say, city building committee. Anyway, it was established in 1925, and in 1926 city privileges were granted. In 1927, tax privileges were granted for investors, because of course those fat cats wanted to get even fatter. And then the city finally started to grow in 1928. They built a railway station and a post office, and they started to build houses along a 10-kilometer stretch of land. In 1933, a plan was presented to house 250,000 people in the city. And that was definitely a good idea, because Gdynia reached half that number already by 1939. But then, of course, the Germans also invaded in 1939. The Battle of Westerplatte was the first battle of the German invasion of Poland. On the 1st of September, 200 soldiers outside of Gdansk held back a German force that was roughly 30 times larger, and they kept it up for 7 days. The Battle of Wisna to the south of Gdansk was another similarly impressive feat. Less than 1,000 Polish soldiers held back 40,000 Germans for 3 days. Fun fact, that's the battle that the Swedish metal band Sopot is singing about in the song 40-1. And there were many other battles like that, where the Germans greatly outnumbered the Poles. The Battle of Gdynia was one of the major battles during the German invasion. The Germans invaded on September 1st, and on September 14th they captured Gdynia. It might not have been a 40-1 ratio here, but there were still 39,000 Germans versus 14,700 in Gdynia. In the end, the outcome was inevitable, and the rest is, as they say, history. After the war, Gdynia rebuilt the heavily damaged port and also continued to build up the city. The Modernist city center that Gdynia is famous for had started construction before the attack, and it was completed after the war. There was also a lot of people flocking to the city. Many of the previous inhabitants had been forcefully transported out of the city by the Germans, but new people were replacing them. People from all over Poland, in fact, so there was a major demographic shift in Gdynia. So Gdynia was growing, but all wasn't well in the city. Gdynia was liberated from the Germans by the Russians. The Russians did return Gdynia to Poland, but they also imposed Soviet influence on Poland for many years to come. In 1989, the Soviet Union fell, but there were many years of Soviet influence between 1945 and 1989. And Gdynia wasn't very happy about that. The city became a center for protests against the Soviet regime, and there were many violent protests by shipyard workers in 1970, for example, which ended quite horribly. And the Solidarity movement also started in 1980 in Gdynia. It was the first independent trade union in a Warsaw Pact country. That movement also started in the shipyards. After all, the Gdynia port can be seen as the living, breathing heart of the city. In many ways, Gdynia is overshadowed by its big brother Gdansk. Gdansk is a bigger city, and it has a lot of historical sites, like the beautiful old town, for example. But there's plenty to see in Gdynia too. Torpedownia is an old abandoned torpedo launch station just outside the city, for example. It's a bit difficult to get there though, especially if you want to see it up close, because then you need a boat. But it's a prime example of interesting World War II remnants in Gdynia. And the abandoned hotel Zdrawi, or however you pronounce it, is apparently a famous spot for artists, photographers, and urban explorers. There's also beaches to enjoy in summer and a funicular to ride at Kamienna Hill. And we mustn't forget about the aquarium, or the Kashubia Square. Kashubians are a Pomeranian ethnic group related to the Poles, and they have their own language, and apparently their own square. And you can also take a day trip to Hell from Gdynia. Hell, with one L, is a peninsula to the north of Gdynia, and there are ferries there from the city. It's apparently a lovely place to lounge by the seaside, but if I went there, I think that it would mostly be so I could say that I've been to hell and back. And on that little bombshell, I think that it's time to wrap up this video all about Gdynia in Poland. I hope you enjoyed it. Like and subscribe, but most importantly, have a great day.